Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's 3:31 p.m. I'm calling this meeting of the Maple Broadband Executive Committee to order for the 26th of February, 2025. So the first item on the agenda is to approve the agenda. Entertain a motion to approve. Made by Nancy. Can I get a second? Shannon, any discussion, any changes to the agenda you guys would like?
Is item 6 different from 7C?
Steve had requested that we discuss part of that in executive session.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
I'm not sure, I don't remember that, Ellie, but if nobody thinks any of this needs to be discussed in this, I think my concern had been that if we're going to have our first finance subcommittee meeting during this meeting, it might run us long. But if all we're going to do is talk about the structure of the committee, I think we don't need to do anything in executive session.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. It's up to you guys what you want to talk about, but it seems to me that it's enough to talk about the structure of the committee, and then part of that discussion can be what we want to achieve in the first meeting, and then we can all go and prep for that, rather than trying to have a meeting in meeting.
Agreed.
So I would be happy to remove that from the executive session proposed list.
Great, thank you.
Agreed.
Okay, I will do that. Okay, here's Lynn. All right, so any other changes to the agenda? Okay, all in favor of approving the agenda as amended, raise your hand or say aye. Any opposed? I guess that would just be Cy. Cy, we're approving the agenda. Are you opposed? Okay. Well, we're recorded as Cy missed the vote, but doesn't seem to be in opposition. Okay, so we have approved the agenda. And then next up is approval of the minutes from February 12th. So you've all received the minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve those as distributed.
Move to approve as distributed.
Okay, can I get a second? Nancy? Okay. All right, any discussion? All in favor, raise your hand or say aye. Okay, and Jeff is abstaining because you weren't here. Yep, all right. So those pass unanimously amongst the attendees. Okay, public comments. Would anyone like to make a public comment? Okay, hearing none. Steve, over to you for the chair report.
Yeah, I'll make it real brief. I already reported this to Shannon before we convened. I just got a laugh out of it. This was what Ellie had distributed 15 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, which I'm sure we'll be discussing. But especially if any of you on the call are wordsmiths, you'll appreciate the fact that someone spent a lot of time creating an acronym for this. The long version of this bill is streamlining program efficiency and expanding deployment to unserved populations through BEAD Act. So if you compress it all down, it's Speed Up BEAD Act. So very entertaining. Someone spent a lot of time working on that.
Some people in Washington have nothing better to do, I think.
I wasn't going to go there. And then the other item, I raised this at our last executive committee meeting, and I think maybe only Jeff was not in attendance, and I just kind of wanted to walk through it real quick. We're working kind of through general consensus, a service level agreement regarding responsiveness within the executive committee. And under the terms of that kind of informal service level agreement, we are obliged to respond to any communications by the end of the following business day, which only means that we're asking that you check your email every day. And if you check your email today and you say, I have no way I can do anything about this today, you just respond and say, I can't work on it right now, but you've responded. So that way we can be sure we're able to keep up our pace. That's it for my chair report.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So moving on to the executive director report, I also have a brief one. So I said in the last meeting, so I think it was the last meeting, that, and I know that we have the audits later down on the agenda, but I said previously that that's essentially my top priority, and that has been the bulk of what I've spent my time on the last 2 weeks. So I think I'll give you guys the headline now, which is that Lynn and Darlene and I, I almost said Cy, but no, Darlene and I had a call with Bonnie on Friday, was it? I think it was Friday. Yeah, Friday afternoon. And I think we're in a pretty good place in terms of understanding what she needs. And I finished going through everything for 2021 and 2022, passed that over to her on Monday to make sure that it is how she, in the format that she wants to see it, where she can understand what she needs to understand. And I've been chunking through 2023, and I promised Lynn I'd come to this meeting with an expectation of when I'm going to be done that. And I think I should be done by the end of the week or end of Monday latest. Hopefully it's the end of the week. There's just a couple of things in the inventory side that may be a little bit hairy. So I'm giving myself the weekend just in case things run over. But I can definitely see the light at the end of the tunnel. So we do still need Bonnie to reply back that she's happy with the format that we're giving her things. And then Darlene's going to have some work to do on the journals, but I wanted to update on that in my executive director report. And then the other thing is we had, as you guys all know, we were sitting in a holding pattern on the BEAD subrecipient capacity grant. I forget its official name, but that thing. So we did hear words that that has been approved by NTIA. There's just a couple of minor detailed changes to the wording of the revision that I need to get feedback to the VCBB. So they told us we can go ahead and proceed with additional work, and then we just have a little bit more to re-sign the grant agreements with all the clarifications that the NTIA has now approved. So that's good news.
I hear you calling it what it is, but what is the scope of that the additional funds?
Well, this is the grant that we applied for last year that we were working on, for example, the revisions to the network management agreement and the high level design that JSI had done and the accounting work to prepare for BEAD and some other engineering things under that. But it's that scope of work. And we've been asked since September or something like that to put it on hold because NTIA was questioning the level of detail in it or something. Anyway, so we've had several rounds back and forth of providing additional detail and then providing more detail again. And anyway, so it's now been approved, and we just need to dot the I's and cross the T's in terms of getting the grant agreement re-signed. Because the other thing is the old grant agreement we had to be done by the end of January, so we would now be outside the bounds of that grant agreement. So they're extending that date. I'm not sure to what, but obviously it'll probably be whatever is the current date of the when they expect the BEAD applications to close.
Ellie, what is the, sorry. Oh, come on.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, what is the amount of the grant?
Oh, it's 169,500, I think, something in that range.
And is that a reimbursable setup?
I believe it's
What's that one?
the current grant agreement we have is essentially a fixed subaward where
What's
we invoice based on milestones.
Okay,
So,
so it is
yeah,
reimbursement.
I'm sorry?
Well, it's reimbursed. It's
need to start with
reimbursed.
6:30.
We're paid based on milestones. So the first milestone was, I think, signature of the grant agreement, and then the second one was producing a report by the end of June, which we did. I think we've received. It's been a while, but if we look at the latest dashboard, it'll tell us the amount of cash we've received. But we've already received more cash than what we spent against the grant because we had deposit so many months ago. And then the last milestone was based on delivery of the final report showing what we'd done. But I don't know, because I haven't seen the updated grant agreement, if they're going to change it, if they're going to change it.
Okay.
Because the way it's currently written, we get the entire amount even if we don't spend every penny. But I don't know if that's been changed.
Obviously, the reason I'm raising the issue is to understand what exposure we might have to the extent that we're engaging third-party professionals, not just our own internal services and time, but accounting, engineering, other third-party professionals. We are in a different environment, and floating those costs is just worthy of discussion prior to floating them.
Yes, agreed. So, like
Okay,
I said, we
thank you.
can open up.
Enough
Yeah, we
said.
can open up the dashboard, but I'm pretty sure that we've spent less money than the amount of money that we actually have cash in the bank.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Okay.
that's true.
Yeah, and the other thing as well is, I mean, the VCBB if I think they would have made us whole in the event that we did have exposure. I mean, that was kind of their intent. Is geez, like if NTIA doesn't come through, then we're gonna have to find some other money, because the amount of money that they're talking about here in these grants, in the grand scheme of their overall budgets, is not really high.
Mhm.
But having said that, there's no guarantees on that, and it's still, to your point, incumbent on us to be careful of the risks. But as I said, we were told to pause this so long ago that we didn't really have the ability to get out over our skis.
Thank you.
Okay. And then the one other thing I wanted to say is I have also started, as well as I mentioned last time, on putting in some poll applications to Green Mountain Power for some of the routes that are in the areas where some of the areas down in the Go Net Speed towns, as well as some of the areas that we will either be building during BEAD and we want to understand the costs, or that we would likely be building regardless what happens with BEAD. So we can talk about that more in executive session. So I've started doing that. There's still quite a bit more work to be done. That's been started. So that's it for my report.
Questions for Ellie?
Okay. All right, hearing none, we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is discussion of the finance committee or subcommittee or working group or what have you. So, so Steve and I guess Shannon had distributed a potential charter for that, and we wanted to have a discussion today about that. But I think also just fundamentally, what do we want to accomplish with this, and maybe just talking structurally under open meeting law, how do we think is the best way to structure this group?
So I'm happy to offer some thoughts if you're opening the floor to that. Okay. And I also want to take responsibility for, having suggested, should we think about this, and then conveniently had everyone else do all this great work to figure out how. So thank you very, very much. I think the draft I saw, and I'm not sure if everything I have is most current. There was the NEK background piece, the NEK broadband background piece that sort of laid out a charge, if you will, to their what they called their finance and audit committee. And then there was numbered items 1 through 8 finance subcommittee review that looked like an overview. And I think Shannon, is that something that you and Adam had put together?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, Steve compiled that based on, yeah, I'm unmuted. Steve compiled that based on feedback that Adam and I had. I don't
You're
care.
cutting out.
I'm sorry. I don't care what
Can't hear you, Shannon.
interesting.
I can hear him.
I can hear it.
I can.
It's you. Anyway, however we do this is
Wait,
fine
she
with
can't
me.
hear you, Shannon. What are we gonna do? Hold on.
She'll have to watch the recording. My only goal in getting involved with this was making sure that whatever we do is compliant with open meeting laws.
And I think you've done a really nice job. It seems like even teeing up the proposed agenda and meeting minutes to ensure that we have a process. So it seems like we have a good path forward if we choose to move forward. I know we want to talk about perhaps some of the mechanics, but in terms of the charge to the committee, if you will, is it the NEK broadband committee outline that would be our basis for discussion of that. Because it has a multi-part, role of the committee, and then it lays out a number of headings. Is that something we're thinking of using, or at least discussing the role?
From my perspective, I kind of kicked this off with that document I sent out and tweaked a little bit, Jeff. I actually didn't look at that package at all. I glanced over it, but I didn't use it as a guide for anything I wrote. And from my perspective, just because NEK did it a while ago, it doesn't make it a good base point. It could be, but I guess, need to make that decision. All I was looking for was something quite simple. My big concern was just not to make it too complex. I think one other thing I want to just throw in at this point as well, Jeff, is it sounds like there is consensus among our group that we want to have a finance committee of some sort that could convene off, at times that they select to discuss matters, to clarify matters, and to develop strategies and whatnot. And I guess maybe the first question I would suggest is, are we all pretty aligned that we want to proceed with this?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I just want to make, I'm not sure I'm looking at the most current documents, but I want to make sure I understand what we're talking about in terms of the subcommittee's charge.
Right. That's where I was going with this. And is it that NEK, what's entitled NEK Community Broadband Finance and Audit Committee document? Because it has as I say, a heading, role of the committee, and then lays out essentially the charge, or is there something else?
I sent that along. Yeah, I mean, to Steve's point, I sent that along from NEK just as something for you guys to consider how they were thinking of it. And Krista, as much as said, we did this a long time ago. It may or may not be suitable for you. Like, for example, we may just want a finance committee and not a finance and audit committee. And maybe we don't want our, I mean, maybe we do or don't want our finance. I mean, I think it does, just talking off the top of my head, I think it would be good to have a finance committee discussing the budget before it comes to the full executive committee, just because it gives more time to really get into some of the weeds on things. I mean, that would have been a nice thing to have, and will be a nice thing to have going forward. But I think that's exactly what we need. I just sent it along as a sample for you guys to consider. But I think that's, to your point, the kind of what we want to do now is talk about what do we want this committee to do if we think it's useful. What are some of the key functions?
Jeff, are you passively suggesting we consider use that as a starting point, the NEK document?
My assumption was that we were, so I was just trying to get up to speed. And I'm hearing that that's open to discussion. My point, however, in getting to roll, why do this, was I thought their highlighting of budgeting and financial planning and reporting were particularly germane to our situation. We're in a very fluid environment. We need to do a lot of internal what if testing to see where things stand. It's not a good use of the executive committee's time to try to plod through that. We ought to be punching holes in that in a different environment. So it was really those things that, from my perspective, I thought could be of most value and most efficient in terms of use of time. The biting off of, audit and internal controls and accountability policies, meeting with independent accountants. I guess that's okay, but it might be a bigger bite. There's a certain, my understanding anyway, is audit committees have a higher level of fiduciary responsibility, perhaps, and I just don't want to stumble into that.
So Jeff, you're talking then about a charge around budgeting and financial planning. And did I miss a third piece?
It was reporting.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's one of great interest for me, in addition to the other two, because I I would just love to have a forum to talk about what are some of the KPIs and what's some of the best way to present financial metrics that are useful to the executive committee and the governing board to be able to track how the business is going.
Yeah.
Like, how could we better visualize showing what's going on? What are some things we should be talking about or showing that we're not? It would be great to have a forum to discuss that.
So,
Okay, thanks.
yeah, reporting is one. What were the other two, please?
Budgeting and financial planning.
Do we want to limit
Well,
ourselves?
that was under one heading in that particular NEK outline. So heading one was budgeting and financial planning with 6 bullet points under it, some of which are probably germane to us still. I think most. Reporting had 2 bullet points below it. We could refine that a bit, but I think it captures the essence. And then their third item was financial oversight, which took on more of an audit role from my perspective. So I'm not sure we want to bite that off. It's, but my thought was we should have some reference to the finance committee makes recommendations. That you know, it assists with reporting and it makes recommendation. Otherwise, it doesn't do anything. It reports to the executive committee, I assume, and that's as far as it goes. So its role is limited. Ideally, this is a forum, as I say, especially in that budgeting and financial planning heading, to do a lot of testing and distilling to come back to the executive committee.
I'd love to see if we could take what's in front of us on the screen and underscore the parts that we really care a lot about, and others, it sounds like, Jeff, for example, internal controls, it sounds like maybe we could exclude that for now. I guess part of what we could do is talk about, we can always change the charter. So I guess we could start with something that's manageable and then add more content later as we grow. Is there anything, Jeff, that we could, can you help us skinny this down a little bit?
So this is a Word document, right?
Yep.
Okay. My thought was to remove the pieces that say internal controls and accountability policies and meeting with independent accountants from the scope. And then there is a last heading, which is bonding, which I think might be useful to leave in there because it indicates that the committee shall assume primary responsibility for recommendations to the executive committee regarding the incurring of indebtedness to finance capital acquisitions. Right? Great forum to test what if. Like, can we do this? How might it work? And the result of that might be recommendations to the executive committee. Here's the model. That's what I'm thinking.
And actually and ultimately to the governing board, because I mean, a question I have is, does this committee report to the executive committee or to the governing board? Obviously, we're talking about creating it here, and it could really do whatever, but ultimately the decision of incurring debt is one of the things that under the bylaws is reserved for the governing board. But in actual facts, the governing board is likely to take its direction from the executive committee as well as finance committee.
So yeah, Jeff, I struck out what I thought you thought might be left out, so all that black stuff is simply removed from potential scope at this point.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. I would also suggest just referring to it as a finance committee rather than finance and audit. That's up at the top. And then we could customize the first paragraph accordingly. The second and third, again, are maybe somewhat specific to them. No, third. No, do we want to get into the weeds here? Not less than 3, not more than 7 members.
Yeah, personally, this statutory basis doesn't help.
Okay.
I would make it go away. I think, role the committee, I think is essentially what this is all about. And I don't know how we want to capture that, but let's, for the sake of argument, we'll just make that go away too.
Well, can I just add, just remind us, we have a 5-member executive committee, right? Apart from ex officio members. And so we can only have, is it true we can only have, am I right about that? We have 5?
Well, our decision, Nancy, was that we wanted to take the teeth, if you will.
I wasn't quite finished. I think we wanted to make sure that we didn't have a quorum of the executive committee, right?
That's one thing we want to probably do.
So
Otherwise,
if we're talking about structure, we need to keep that in mind in the text here.
yeah. And the other thing is, I was also just realizing, I mean, I take Steve's point about we don't need to go too crazy about the statute, but we do need to make sure that what we do is in line with our bylaws. And so I'm putting in the chat what our bylaws say about other committees, which essentially says the governing board may choose to establish other committees. The bylaws are silent on whether or not the executive committee may establish subcommittees. So I just putting that there for your consideration.
Yeah. We might as well keep it simple, have a proposal for the governing board to consider in the summary that Steve put together after review with Shannon and Adam. It indicates that the members are changed or reaffirmed annually at Maple Broadband's annual meeting. So, having that relationship to the governing board makes sense.
This is the one that I sent out, and I think this is where Sy had suggested changing some wording here and just simply say, can't contain any more than 2 voting members of the executive committee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So are we in agreement that we're going to make this first section go away? We're not in agreement on that.
Well, I thought Ellie was suggesting that we might want to refer to our own bylaws, right?
Right. And have the governing board establish this as a committee that reports to, what I would ask is that it would report to the executive committee, because it's not anything that's taking action. It's making recommendations to the executive committee. Any action that the executive committee would consider as a result of that would then be conveyed to the board. And that's a suggestion. So,
my recommendation to make this a efficient effort to get this taken care of would be to draft a straw man. We can do it live right now if we want, and then start fixing it. And personally, I love it, Jeff. If you just told us what you think would be a good starting point, we can plug it in here and then make some work on refining it or something like that. I'm worried that we're not going to get this done today at this rate. Maybe that's okay. I don't know.
I'm not sure what you're referring to right now. Is it trying to redraft this document?
I'm just wondering if there's any way we could not be drafting in this meeting. mean, if we can talk about the gist of it, and then someone might be willing to pull together a draft, we could even review before our next meeting online,
Yeah,
Mhm.
and our next meeting
rather
is
rather than wordsmith it here.
Mhm.
yeah, our next meeting is next week, Wednesday, and then the governing board is the following Tuesday. So I think that makes sense to me. If someone would take the lead on basically merging the two documents, the results of today's discussion, and circulate it, and then we try and approve something at next week's executive committee meeting, and then we can distribute in the board pack that goes out at the end of the week.
Yeah, my concern here is that we're we're entering the world of paralysis by analysis, and we don't want to do that. So I guess and to me, what this is all about is having the finance committee meet and start doing some thinking that I think we all agree needs to be done. So I hate for us to be spending weeks working on a document and analyzing what we're going to do and not doing anything. So I guess I would love it.
I think with a little more discussion, if I might just volunteer Jeff,
Mhm.
with a little more discussion, Jeff, I think could draft it and we could look at it and we'd be ready to finalize it by
I'd
our
be-
next meeting.
I'd be happy to take the draft, Steve, that you had on the screen and merge that with your 1 through 8 points, just to make sure that that's coordinated. I'll leave the block, Ellie, for where we might reference the bylaws and chat with you, and then get that circulated. And Steve, I hear you loud and clear. I sequentially, again, if this is a governing board establishes it, the sequence here is right. Like, let them establish it let the governing board establish it at its next meeting if it finds it prudent, and then we'll get to work.
Good. Nancy.
The one other thing that I can think of that we haven't quite talked about yet is how the members of the committee are to be appointed and how often that happens. I guess we have how often, but we talked at our last meeting about should we open up the committee membership to the members of the governing board, and what if everybody wants to jump on it? What should we do? Kind of a
Well, I wish we had
doubt
that
it.
problem. Finance committees are usually the smallest.
But in any case,
I
the
think you
question
could do
of
that just by choosing the number, no fewer than and no more than X number of people on the committee.
So Nancy, the summary that Steve put together did indicate that the board members are appointed annually by the governing board, or that the committee members would be appointed annually by the governing board.
okay, and then so that I think that implies that the executive committee would suggest a slate for the governing board to consider.
Perhaps, we have on our agenda a nominating committee, right? Yet another thankless task for a different group of volunteers. So that might address that. A couple of other things in the weeds, and then Steve, we can try to move along. Would the executive director be staff to this committee and not a member of it, right? So would not be counted among the 3 to 7, correct?
Sure.
Okay.
Ellie,
And
how do you feel about that?
Well,
I think that's appropriate.
by
Okay,
definition, the executive director would sort of be an ad hoc member of any committee of the board.
okay, but it wouldn't, thank you. And so Ellie's presence wouldn't tip the quorum issue,
Right.
right?
Right.
Okay.
No,
Yeah,
she'd be there
that's what I was after.
Ellie is
that.
actually, she's on the governing board too. She's
Okay.
got 2 hats.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm on the governing board, but I'm not a voting member of the executive committee. So unless we're going to wind up having like 10 members of the governing board on this committee, which seems highly unlikely, my presence wouldn't contribute to quorum concerns.
Okay. So the in the NEK draft, it indicated the treasurer shall be chair of the finance committee. I'm not sure if we want that to be the case, I think what we should make explicit is that the treasurer would be one of the 3 to 7. Right, and the treasurer, so and then I think the interesting question would be in the NEK draft, they indicate an appointee to their committee could be anyone in the from the district. And I kind of liked that. I'm not sure if the thought was the other. So assuming we had 2 executive committee members and the treasurer, there's the cut, right? There's 3 members to form the committee. It could be up to 7. I don't know what affirmative obligations there are to, try to hit that number and from what pool. There's been some discussion right now about from amongst the governing board. Good idea. I don't know if there are, financial professionals in the community who might participate in that, but don't want to do more with Maple Broadband. Somebody with specific expertise. I don't know. I'm not saying I know somebody who fits that profile. I'm just wondering if we would be open to that, in which case the NEK structure, anybody in the district could be a member, leaves the door open.
Well, that's what our bylaws say. This is what I put in the chat there. So the bylaws say membership in such committees is not limited to board members. So I think unless if we wanted to amend it to restrict it, we could do it. But otherwise, if we're silent on it, then the bylaws would prevail. And to your point, Jeff, if there's some wonderful financial professional who wants to join, absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree.
I'm a little concerned about that because what we do is pretty arcane. And if you bring in a CPA cold, you're not going to get a lot about what we do and how we do it. So when I had written this, my intent had been to pre-qualify potential members by saying they're involved with Maple Broadband, so they're on the governing board or executive committee, because then that means that they've already been indoctrinated. And I think about, Lynn's been working diligently to catch up and understand all the things we do, but she's, I imagine, not 100% caught up yet. And so that should be taken into account as well. If we spend all of our time trying to educate a non-initiated person into our committee and what we're doing in our finances, that would diminish productivity.
Yeah, but I don't think we want to close that door.
I agree.
Okay.
One thing that I'm not clear about is, and it's partly about the upcoming governing board meeting, but going forward also. Are you thinking that anybody who, up to 7 members, say, anybody on the governing board who wants to be on the finance committee can? Or is there any kind of, what are you thinking about that?
I think if you have members of the governing board who want to be on a finance committee, you should be really, really happy.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
well, I think that it's not a bad thing. You have people who understand what Maple Broadband is, and they have different areas of expertise, and many of them have retail expertise, and we are a business here, and that's the piece of it that we have not been always as attentive to as we have to being a construction business, as it were. So, I'm way more inclined to have people who are interested in, who have different viewpoints, especially if part of the task that we have set is to not only review and consider, but to make recommendations. I think having people who want to be involved in that is great, and we should welcome them.
Yeah, you may want to consider having a typical clause sorry, someone's got an echo. Maybe it's me. Have a cause to be able to have the committee vote to remove a member in case you somehow have someone that you don't actually want there that becomes disruptive.
Yes, that's actually my concern.
Yeah, because that way at least there's an out, right? Because you can't remove a member of the governing board. The town has to do it. But if somehow someone got on the committee and the committee decided this person is not helpful, you'd want a way to be able to vote to remove them.
Can I just step back for a second? We're burning through a lot of time doing this, and I know there's a lot left on the agenda. Is the thinking, Ellie, that we're going to maybe have one more executive committee meeting before the governing board meeting, or is our next
Check the
meeting?
calendar.
Yep, it's next week.
Good. Okay. So, so my thought is, and I'm going to put this in the form of a motion so that hopefully we can move on, is Jeff is essentially, I believe, accepted the role of being kind of a document editor on this. And it also seems to me that a lot of the input could also be improved if he worked with Ellie so that she could add some of the content that there was of concern as well, with an objective to having a draft available in time for our next executive committee meeting, and with an objective to have it ready to submit to the governing board the following week. So that's my motion. Is there a second? Okay, Jeff, was that okay?
That was the second.
Okay. Are you okay with that too, Ellie? I just threw you in under the bus there. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Well, all in favor of the proposal, please raise your hand or say aye. Okay. Any opposed?
I think that was all of you.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Thanks,
Great.
all.
So the next item is executive session. Steve, if you would do the necessary.
Necessary. I move to find that premature general public knowledge regarding Maple Broadband's business strategy would clearly place us at a substantial disadvantage because it risks disclosure of our activities if they were to be communicated to the public. Is there a second? There was a second from Shannon. I move that we enter into executive session to discuss business strategy under Title I, Section 313, subsection A of the Vermont statutes. Is there a second? A second from Shannon. We got another vote from Nancy, so we're good to go. If you can turn off the recording, Ellie.